Okay, welcome. This is going to be material for the dissection of a specialized amniote, in this case, the chicken. So we'll start by looking at the externals of the bird. It's a tetrapod. It has 4 limbs, 2 wings, and 2 legs. The legs have got 3 toes forward and 1 toe back. They're scaled on the lower part, feathered on the upper part. The wing of the bird, you'll see the skeletons in a coming lab, has 3 parts to it. The humerus is contained near to the shoulder, runs from the shoulder down to the first bend, and then the radius and ulna run around the center of the wing, and then the hand, the fingers, comprise the outer part of the wing. The feathers of the bird attached to the wing have separate units. So the primary feathers are those attached to the hand, so they move with the hand if you rotate the wing. The secondary feathers are the large flight feathers at the back. They attach directly to the ulnar bone. And there are also tertials that run sort of along the shoulder by the humerus. The head of the bird has external nostrils, an eye. The ear is posterior to and lower than the eye. Inside the mouth we'll find the tongue of the bird, which is an unusual shape, sort of attached at the back and protrudes forwards. It's not a particularly elaborate tongue in this species. On the upper side of the mouth we can see the choana, or the internal opening from the nostrils. So they don't have a complete palate, they have an incomplete palate that runs down here. The back of the mouth you would be able to see, if we were investigating closely, the opening to the trachea and to the esophagus. So that's the externals of the bird. Now the first stage of our dissection will be to investigate the flight muscles. So to do that we will take the skin off on the ventral side of the bird as far as the wing, and then investigate how the flight muscles and the wing operate. So we've now cleared the skin off the pectoral muscles and removed the pectoral muscles while leaving them attached to the wing. So we can see here the pectoralis major, the large muscle of the functioning of the wing. It attaches from the sternum along the wishbone or the furcula, and then to the front of the humerus, the leading edge. So I'm just going to clear this away a tiny bit more as we go before we start to look at the function of it. The second muscle, which lies dorsal to the pectoralis major, is the supracoracoideus. The name means it runs along the coracoid, which is a bone of the pectoral girdle that you will see next week. This is the supracoracoideus. The role of the supracoracoideus is to raise the wing, but it's a ventral muscle. So what it does is it has a tendon that runs here, the silvery tendon that runs through a gap between the bones of the pectoral girdle, runs between the coracoid and the furcula and the scapula, which is oriented along the body, and then it attaches to the top of the humerus rather than to the front. So we should be able to get the action of these 2 muscles. The pectoralis major, when it pulls the wing down. Supracoracoideus, when it pulls the wing up. So by using these 2 muscles, we can show the flapping action of the wing. So the attachment point for the pectoralis major is at the front of the humerus here. The attachment point for the supracoracoideus comes through this gap, through the foramen triosteum and around, and it then attaches at the top of the humerus here. So we've now cleared away more of the muscle around the shoulder joint itself to expose the tendon from the supracoracoideus that comes through the foramen triosteum from the underside and then around here and then attaches to the top of the humerus at this point. This is what raises the wing up. Pectoralis major attaches to the underside of this flange in the front of the humerus. This is what pulls the wing down. So if we pull the supracoracoideus, we may be able to see the movement of this tendon and understand how by pulling on the supracoracoideus we'll then raise the wing up, pivoting it at the shoulder joint. So the foramen triosteum is this gap here and here, which is formed by the coracoid, which is the muscle coming up from the sternum, the scapula, which runs along by the rib cage, and the furcula or the wishbone, which is at the front. So the supracoracoideus sends its tendon through this gap, and then it attaches to the top of the humerus at this point, whereas the pectoralis major, the larger muscle, attaches to the underside of the humerus on this flange here. So the foramen triosteum means the whole of 3 bones between the coracoid, the scapula, and the furcula. So the respiratory system of the birds is unusual in that they have air sacs across the abdomen. We are going to see whether we can inflate these air sacs by use of a tube down the trachea. So if it works, we should see, instead of the lungs expanding sort of in the anterior part of the abdomen, we should see air sacs across the posterior part expanding. And you can see the air sacs expanding. You can switch it off now and coming down here. So air, when it enters the bird, doesn't go directly to the lungs. Instead, it goes into air sacs in the posterior part of the abdomen. From there, it comes forward to the lungs and out. The next stage of the dissection requires us to remove the sternum. The sternum is the large breastbone of the bird, runs from the shoulders via the coracoid down to the bottom of the abdomen. So I'm going to have to remove the sternum, cut through the ribs along the side, and then lift the whole structure off to enable us to see the viscera underneath. When doing so, I'll have to be careful of the liver, which is a very soft organ just underneath here. So we'll have a go at doing that one next. Okay, so we've now removed the sternum and the wishbone from the bird. We have one wing remaining here, and we have the pectoral muscle of the left side remaining here. Structures we can see at the moment are, again, the crop, which is the anterior part of the digestive tract, which would then lead into the esophagus that we cannot see, running along into here, and then into the digestive tract. The heart is contained under this layer of fat here, and we will investigate that later. The main organs we see in the abdomen at this stage are the liver, the 2 lobes of the liver along here. Now the liver is a very fragile organ in birds, so before we go any further, we're going to have to remove the liver because otherwise it would just get too damaged. We can part it slightly to see the heart in here, duct coming back, the greenish gallbladder down here on the dorsal side of the liver. And all of this fat is contained within the abdomen and is covering the digestive organs. We can just start to see the gizzard, which is the muscular stomach of the bird that we will expose later. So the next stage will be to remove the liver, leaving the heart intact, and we'll remove this fat and start to get a view of the internal organs of the chicken. Okay, so part way through exposing the internal viscera, we've opened up this incredibly thick layer of fat that's running around the entire abdomen. It's partially cleared the gizzard. We'll continue to do so, and showing the intestines that also have fat running along them. So this is a laying chicken that's had a relatively inactive life, and they've built up a lot of fat. So you can see it here around the crop, under the skin, and inside the abdomen in this big thick layer. Okay, so we've removed much of the fat from the abdomen, allowing us to see some of the internal organs. Some of you will be familiar with from the other specimens we looked at. The spleen is this large red oval object in the middle. The stomach of the birds is quite different to in the other groups. It's a muscular stomach called the gizzard, the silvery one, that also has, leading into it, a glandular part, the proventriculus. In birds without teeth, they don't grind their food or chew their food in their mouths. Instead, portions are taken down, softened up slightly in the proventriculus, and then ground in the hard muscular ridges within the gizzard. The gizzard then exits into the intestine that we will remove later. But you can see the intestine with a loop coming down and running along between the loops is the pancreas. So this is the pinkish structure in the middle. The intestine then winds around and around and around, and then eventually exits at the cloaca. So we will now try to remove the digestive tract so we can see the different parts of it more clearly. There is a large blood supply going to and from the intestines, with a big sheet of mesentery in the middle of it, and you can see these veins draining the intestines that will then take the nutrients back to the liver and other parts of the body. Okay, we've now laid out the digestive tract of the chicken. So we can see the proventriculus, where food enters from the esophagus and then gets ground up to smaller particles in the gizzard. This may have stones in there to assist with that. Food then exits the gizzard and goes into the first part of the intestine, the duodenum, which is where the pancreas is running along. This loop comes around and then it enters the rest of the small intestine, which comes around all the way down here. There are two parts of the small intestine of this part, the jejunum up here and then the ileum further down. The other feature we see in the avian digestive tract are these two ceca that arise at the junction between the small intestine and the large intestine. You may find them referred to as colic ceca or just this, the cecum or ceca for plural. In some birds these are virtually absent. In the pigeons they don't really have them, but in herbivorous birds in particular they are large and are the site of bacterial fermentation. After the ceca arise, we have the colon or the large intestine, which then exits at the cloaca of the bird. If we open up the inside of the gizzard, we should be able to see the ridges on the inside of it. We have large muscles on the outside, a keratinized inner layer, and here you can see the food that the chicken had been eating. This is where food is ground up before entering the intestines. Okay, the reproductive system of the chicken, we have a female that we can look at. These yellow round balls are yolks that have been produced from the ovary. So the ovary, you'll find different stages of development of the ova, from the very small ones through to larger ones. Of course, this chicken would have been laying eggs on a daily basis, so it has several different stages of development. These would then be taken into the oviduct, and then they would progress down the oviduct, which is this structure here, where egg whites would be put on, and then eventually they would end up in the shell gland towards the bottom, where the shell would be deposited. So in a breeding chicken, the male would fertilize the chicken by cloacal touching. Sperm would enter the oviduct and travel up to then fertilize an egg that's brought down into the oviduct. In the laying chicken, of course, they are not being fertilized, so we would have an unfertilized egg growing or having the shell deposited down in this stage. Now we may be able to open up the shell gland part of the oviduct and find an egg with a partially made shell on it. So we have a really good example here of an egg that's got the egg whites put on it, but the shell has not fully formed. So if we are lucky and careful, we can have a soft-shelled egg. It's just like an egg you would buy in the store, only without a fully formed hard shell on the outside of it. So the reproductive system is relatively simple: an ovary coming down into the oviduct with a shell gland at the end. The other structures that we cannot see yet are the kidneys, which are dorsal to the reproductive tract, and the lungs that we will look at in a moment. The kidneys of the bird are situated against the vertebral column. There are three parts to them. There are these dark red structures here, here, and here. So they are embedded against the body wall and are tucked right up against the vertebrae. The other organs we may find further on will be the lungs that are against the rib cage right at the front of the abdomen. We will now focus on the heart and lung region. Okay, in this view of the region around the heart, we can see the trachea coming down from the neck that would then go down to the lungs. It branches just down here. And we have these tracheal muscles that come off from the side of the trachea down to the edge. We'll see the blood returning from the head in jugular veins that will also take the blood coming in from the wing. Then they will then pull before coming into the atria. I've taken the outer layering of around the heart, the pericardium, off to expose the ventricle and the atria on either side. In order to see the aortic arches coming off the heart, we will need to remove this fat around this region, and that's the next stage of the dissection. Okay, I've now exposed the systemic arches leaving the heart of the chicken. You can see between the two atria this aortic trunk emerging, which sends oxygenated blood to the body. Birds have got 3 branches here. They have a left brachiocephalic artery and a right brachiocephalic. The name brachiocephalic refers to the fact that it sends branches to the wing, the brachium, with axillary and pectoral arteries, and the cephalic part refers to the head when it branches and runs alongside the jugular veins up to the head. The left brachiocephalic, the right brachiocephalic, you can here see the carotid artery, the right carotid heading up towards the head, and this bit heading out towards the wing. The third one is the single systemic arch that goes down to supply the rest of the body. Unlike groups that have got 2 systemic arches, the birds have retained just this right one. It's thick, carries blood then to form the dorsal aorta and supply the organs. The pulmonary arches go to the lungs. We'll investigate them next. We'll now expose the pulmonary trunk leaving the heart. This is this large artery adjacent to the systemic arteries that it comes around and then comes in here to the left lung. So the lung is this mesh-like structure embedded against the walls of the abdomen and the thoracic region. So the lung is normally bright pink. It's between the heart and the ribs, and you can see it in here. So this is taking deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The air is coming from the air sacs into the lungs, from which it would leave the lungs and then go into the anterior air sacs and then eventually back out the mouth. If we bring the heart forwards, we can see the veins that are bringing blood back from the body pooling together in this posterior vena cava to then distribute blood into the atria for recirculation.